Hey everybody, Phil here, coming to you again from Japan with another video about coronavirus from a Japanese perspective, though I'm not Japanese. Today, three things I'm going to talk about. First of all, state of emergency. Then I'm going to talk about some of the comments that people have sent me about their personal stories and a couple of other personal stories I've gleaned, so direct from the horse's mouth, as it were, about their experience with coronavirus here in Japan. And then finally, just for fun, I'm going to address some of the critics on this website. Not website, what am I talking about? I got distracted on these videos. So let's talk about state of emergency. From, or I guess today, in an hour or so, the official announcement about the extending of the state of emergency is going to come out, and Japanese government, they love to do this. They love to tell you what they're going to tell you. So on Friday, they said, on Monday, we're going to tell you that the state of emergency... on Monday, we'll officially tell you that the state of emergency is going to be extended. Right now, we're unofficially telling you, even though we did it at a press conference. And you might say, well, okay, that's because on Monday, they're going to have all the plans ready, and they're going to tell you what's going to happen with the extension of the state of emergency. And, well, you'd be wrong about that. Because in Japan, it's decentralized government, right? So, or as I like to call it, government by chaos. So what they've done is, even with the first state of emergency, the very first one, which was just 7 prefectures, they said, okay, here's the state of emergency. And everybody said, okay, what's the state of emergency mean? And the government said, So there is no absolute plan. A lot of the, this is going to be prefecture by prefecture. So kind of what they've said is that we're going to continue the state of emergency. And in 13 prefectures, there's 47 prefectures in Japan, and 13 of them, it's going to be like it is now with stay at home, reduce your person-to-person contact by 80%, 70% less workers going to the office, this kind of thing. In other words, kind of as strict as you can get here in Japan. They want that in 13 prefectures. In the other 34 prefectures, they're a little more vague, and this is I think one of the big problems here, that we get such conflicting information that people are not really sure how serious to take this. So in the other 34 prefectures, it's down to the prefectural government. Some prefectures have said they want people to continue to be exactly the same, stay at home as much as possible, 80% reduction, 70% reduction of work. Some prefectures are going to say, oh, you know what, just be diligent. Some have said, let's try and go back as much to life pre-corona. The only thing I have seen agreed on is that prefectures have said don't go from one prefecture to another. And of course, what they're afraid of is that people who are in, let's say, one of the 13 strict prefectures, let's say like part of Tokyo, will say, oh, you know what, over there, they can pretty much do what they want. Let's go over there. Since we can't go to work anyway, why don't we just go there, and then we can do whatever we want and come back. So, of course, spreading the infection. Oh, that's one of the ones I wanted to talk about. Sorry, I'm going to make a note here. Well, so that's what's happening. Maybe by the time I put this up, they will have actually made the official announcement about the extension. Could this have been the shortest lockdown on Earth in this corona pandemic? Perhaps. I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks that there's been a lockdown. and not even a lockdown, as I said, a please stay at home down. And it seems to be over. And this is all being done on false information. Then I'm going to get to that in a second. But so there's utter confusion about that, I think. The problem is there is no protocol. People love to use this word now from, military background. Protocol about dealing with COVID-19 in Japan. So there's no, even from the doctors, for the medical staffs, there are no official playbooks from the government about how to deal with this virus. So that's why you're seeing lots of stories about people who are sitting in the ambulance for 2 hours or more, trying to find a hospital that will take them, because some hospitals will do it, some hospitals won't. It is utter chaos. And I'm going to move into this other next part of the video where I'm going to talk about some stories. Some of these have been sent to me privately. Some of them were posted as comments on earlier videos, and a couple of them I gleaned from Japanese media sources that were direct interviews with the person involved. So, and this points deeply to a problem with testing. And after these stories, I'll go on to about that a little bit more, because I like to go on and on about testing. So first story came from somebody in Kanagawa, that they'd been incredibly tested. They had been tested positive. They were told to self-isolate at home. They self-isolated at home for 2 weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, the person from the Kanagawa prefectural office phoned them and said, "Congratulations, your 2 weeks are up." And the woman said, "Well, aren't you going to test me again?" And they said, no, it's been 2 weeks, that's fine, you can go out. And she's like, "Well, I don't really feel fine." And they said, no, don't worry, you can go back to work, and everything's normal, you've had your 2 weeks isolation. So she didn't go back to work, and then 3 days later she had a raging fever and was very, very sick again. So her thing was, she should have been tested, and she said this, she should have been tested. People should be tested at the end of this isolation period, because they may not be negative. She was obviously still very sick. So if you're not going to test to see that people are over it, though, that the virus isn't still active in their system, if there is such a test. So luckily she kept on self-isolating, because she knew there was something wrong. Otherwise, and her workplace said, "Well, isn't your quarantine period over?" And she said, "Well, I don't feel well," so she didn't go back. Luckily she had the intelligence to do that and not go back to work and infect a whole whack of other people. So that's story number one. Another person in Hyogo, his story was quite amazing. Got sick, went to the doctor. They said, "Oh, it's just the flu, just go home." A few days later, was feeling very sick, phoned up the hospital, and they said, no, wait a couple more days, and if you're still feeling sick in a couple more days, then come to the hospital. Waited a few more days, was still feeling very sick, went to the hospital. Didn't want them to come in the front door, wanted them to go in the side door, him and his Japanese wife, by the way, and wouldn't test them, said, "Well, maybe now you have the flu, maybe you have the flu and allergies, and please go home." Goes home, has very strong illness and some trouble breathing, but decides to stay home. Basically, this person never got tested. So, those numbers you see about how many people in Japan have it, this guy's not in it. So, and there's a few other people who've written to me, they couldn't get tested. They were sick and couldn't get tested. So, they're not, in the policy, I've heard from backdoor information from someone working in a hospital here, is that they test people if they're serious enough to warrant hospitalization. And that's kind of why the death numbers percentage is a bit high. So unless you're really sick, they're not going to test you. In some cases, there may be exceptions to that. Okay. In another instance, a woman was sick in Tokyo. 3 trips to the hospital. Very difficult to get tested. Was sent home in a taxi. I mean, not thinking about the taxi driver, I guess. Was sent home in a taxi and told just to open the windows. That'll help her breathing because she had trouble breathing. In Saitama, a man died at home. He had been, I think, tested positive. He was tested after death, but was not feeling good. Stayed at home. Was under what I call wife watch, and so his wife was looking after him. And in the morning of one day, she went to work and she came home and he was dead. This virus is very scary. It can turn like that, and that's why you should be tested, and if you're tested positive, that's why you should go to one of these hotels where there's somebody looking after you, at least monitoring you. So right after, and that was on the news, they talked about this man, and immediately after that, and they had somebody from the government saying that, well, people can go home because their family can look after them. This guy was there with his wife, but you had to go out to work unless your wife's going to sit there and literally look at you 24 hours a day. And a story from Gifu that, and this comes from a doctor in Gifu Prefecture, that if a patient can find a hospital without an infection now, they are lucky. Hospitals are shutting down their emergency rooms because of clusters within hospitals. Yes, one of the worst places you can go right now, ironically, is a hospital for coronavirus. And somebody from a small town in Kyushu that said their only hospital has people stationed outside. They have no reported cases in the immediate area. Our only hospital has people stationed outside each entrance with thermometers. If you have any sign of a fever, they won't let you in and they ask you to go home. So this is why the testing is crap here, and the numbers are not to be believed. And that leads me perfectly into dealing with some of these accusations that people, or comments that people have made on my website. And this one guy said, talking about me, this idiot obtains information from the corrupt media and believes it without doing any real research of his own. Well, first of all, you immediately know that this guy's a nut bar because he's one of these corrupt media, mainstream media, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not actually relying on the media. I'm looking at the data. And the problem is the data. I mean, the data is the data. The data is coming from the government. There's no other magic source of data that says, oh, this is what the government doesn't want you to know. Unfortunately, reality hits you. There is one source of data in something like this, and that is, the government. So, is it true? It's what the data is. What are you going to do? So, there's no other magic source of information here. Someone else goes, he says, that I don't have any respect for Japanese people or Japanese culture. I'm not quite sure how he got that, but anyway. And that I was always, berating the situation in Japan. And then this is a guy who claims that I have a bias against Japan. He goes, the Japanese are afraid because they know from experience that all governments lie, and if they speak out against all the bull flying around, they may lose their slave jobs. Okay, to me that sounds like you don't respect Japan very much either, but not either, because for me, it's fine. Your job is your job, and that's the way it is. I don't believe that I'm saying that the man in the street is doing anything here. Someone else says that I should watch the news every day instead of imagining. I literally show clips from the news on these videos sometimes. I'm watching the news. And someone else who says, obviously you're not relying on good data sites. and they give me a Japanese interactive data site below, that site that this person quotes actually doesn't tell you where they get their data from. And they said they don't show all the data because some of it's confusing. That's more trustworthy? Give me a break. And also, I just want to go back, a few videos ago I had this story about a woman who went to Iwate from Tokyo to give birth. And man, this person wrote like a book about that and saying, the woman didn't just choose Iwate at random. She was from Iwate and she was going home, and that's Japanese tradition and culture to go back to your hometown to give birth and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that may very well be true. And well, I know it's true that people do like to do that. But this woman obviously didn't contact the hospital because the hospital would have told her she had to be there 2 weeks before. As far as I know, the virus doesn't say, you know what, we won't spread because this woman's going home to have a baby. It doesn't matter the reason. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't matter the reason she went to wherever, from an infected area to an uninfected area to have a baby. It doesn't matter the reason. Anyway, maybe I'm in a bit of a mood today. So, I'm sure I will have put the numbers up at the bottom of the screen. It's a joke about Tokyo, by the way, and their numbers, and they're going on about how they've had so few. And then you just overlay the number of tests with the number of cases. It's just pathetic that they can only test a few hundred people a day in the largest city in one of the most advanced countries, supposedly, on Earth. And I will rail on about that, and I'm sorry if it offends some of you, and I'm sorry if you think that I'm Japan bashing, but I live here, and I am terrified of this virus, and I personally don't want to have to think that every time I'm going outside my door, there could be a surge of it because nobody is bothering to test. If you don't like my approach about that, then you're welcome to not watch. But for the rest of you, thanks for watching. Next time I'll try and be more funny or happy. I tried to wear a nice shirt. My wife says I shouldn't wear this shirt. It makes me look fat and old and wrinkled. But I said, well, imagine if I didn't wear this shirt. Bye for now.